Hi there, and welcome to this tech tip from Will. In this tech tip, I will be looking at Windows to Go for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. I will start by providing an overview of Windows to Go and will explain what it is and why you would want to use it. Next, I will take a look at the requirements that have to be met in order to use Windows to Go. And finally, I will demonstrate how to create a Windows to Go workspace on my Windows 8.1 Enterprise computer. So let's get started. The first question you probably have is, what is Windows to Go? Windows to Go is a brand new feature that was first introduced in Windows 8 Enterprise and remains available for Windows 8.1 Enterprise. Windows to Go, in a nutshell, allows you to install either Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise onto a USB flash drive. That is, the USB flash drive essentially acts as a hard disk onto which you can install either of these operating systems. When Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise is installed onto a USB flash drive, this is called a Windows to Go workspace. After installing your preferred operating system onto the flash drive, you can then plug the flash drive into any suitable computer and boot up the Windows to Go workspace. Once booted, you can then use the Windows to Go workspace just like you would any regular computer. In short, Windows to Go is just like having a bootable copy of Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise in your pocket that you can boot from any computer in the world. To visualize this better, consider the following example. To create a Windows to Go workspace, you will require a computer that is running either Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise. The Windows to Go feature is actually built into the Windows 8 Enterprise and Windows 8.1 Enterprise operating systems. As such, Windows to Go will be installed along with the operating system. Next, you will require a USB flash drive. Using the Windows to Go feature on the computer, you are able to install a full copy of Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise onto the USB flash drive. Just like traditional computers install operating systems onto hard disks, Windows to Go installs operating systems onto USB flash drives. Consider the flash drive a replacement for a hard disk. After installing Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise onto the flash drive, you will have created a Windows to Go workspace. You can then take the flash drive and plug it into any computer across the world and use it to boot up your Windows to Go workspace. Of course, you may be wondering at this point, well, what if I were to lose the flash drive? Is my Windows to Go workspace secure? Do not worry, Microsoft has thought about this. When you first create the Windows to Go workspace, you will be given the opportunity to encrypt the flash drive using BITLOCKER, Microsoft's full disk encryption software. When a Windows to Go workspace is encrypted with BITLOCKER, you are required to enter a password prior to booting the workspace. Only if this password is entered correctly does the workspace decrypt and boot up. In addition, BITLOCKER will also protect your Windows to Go workspace from an offline attack. That is, if your Windows to Go workspace is stolen, if the thief were to plug the flash drive into a computer which has already been booted, the thief still cannot get to your data, since the flash drive is still encrypted. To use the flash drive, the thief will have no choice but to reformat the flash drive, which, of course, will erase all the data on the drive. As you have probably gathered, Windows To Go is a new alternative to portable computing. The only downside is that you are utterly dependent on having a suitable computer to boot the flash drive. In Microsoft terminology, the computer used to boot your Windows To Go workspace is called a host computer. However, it is worth noting at this point that not all computers can be host computers. In order to boot the Windows To Go workspace, the host computer must meet the Windows 7 certification requirements. That being said, the host computer can be running any Windows operating system. You cannot boot the workspace on a Mac computer. It is possible to boot a Windows To Go workspace from a host computer running Windows 8.1, Windows 8, Windows 7, Windows Vista, Windows XP, or even Windows 2000. As long as the host computer itself meets the requirements, the operating system it is running is irrelevant. However, one exception to this is Windows RT. This is because Windows RT uses an ARM processor. Windows To Go workspaces are only compatible with PCs that run traditional x86 and x64 processors. Also, the host computer must be capable of booting from USB devices. When the host computer boots the Windows To Go workspace, it will, by default, take all of the internal hard disks that are installed in the host computer offline. In other words, the hard disks installed in the host system will not be accessible whilst you are in the workspace. This is done to keep the host computer on your Windows To Go workspace environment separate from one another. Later in the demonstration, I will show you this. It is also worth noting at this point that Microsoft did not design Windows To Go as a replacement to portable computers such as laptops and tablets. In fact, some Windows features in the Windows To Go workspace are not accessible. For starters, there is no Windows recovery environment. The Windows recovery environment, also called Windows RE, is a tool used to repair serious problems that could prevent a computer from starting. With Windows RE, you can access tools such as Startup Repair, System Restore, and Windows Memory Diagnostic. You can also restore a computer from a previously created backup. Since there is no Windows recovery environment included with Windows To Go, if something goes wrong with the workspace, you will have no choice but to recreate it. Second, both the refresh and reset features of Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 are not supported in Windows To Go. Refreshing a Windows 8 or Windows 8.1 computer will essentially reinstall Windows, but will keep all of your files and settings intact. Any applications that came with the computer, as well as any apps you have downloaded from the Windows Store, are also retained. However, a refresh will delete any applications you have installed yourself. A reset, on the other hand, is, in many ways, the opposite of a refresh. A reset will reinstall Windows and will delete all of your files and settings. Any applications that came with the computer will be reinstalled. However, any applications you installed yourself, including any apps downloaded from the Windows Store, will be removed. With Windows To Go, the options to refresh and reset your Windows installation are both disabled. Next to discuss is the hibernation feature. Hibernation is a feature that was primarily designed for portable devices, such as laptops and tablets, that rely on battery power. When a computer has been idle, that is, not used for a significant period of time, the computer may go into hibernation. Hibernation works by saving any programs and documents that are currently open on the computer to the hard disk. The computer is then shut down. When the computer wakes up from hibernation, the saved programs and documents are read back into RAM, and the computer will resume where it left off. However, when a Windows To Go workspace is placed into hibernation, it can only be resumed on the exact same computer. For instance, if I were to boot a Windows To Go workspace on computer 1, if the workspace goes into hibernation, it can only be woken from hibernation as long as the flash drive remains connected to computer 1. Whilst hibernating, if you were to pull the flash drive out of the computer and plug it into computer 2, all of the data saved by hibernation on computer 1 will be lost. This is why hibernation in Windows To Go is disabled by default. Of course, you can enable hibernation manually for Windows To Go by enabling the following group policy: Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Portable Operating System, Allow Hibernate when starting from a Windows To Go workspace. Next, we have the Windows Store. The Windows Store is a brand new feature to Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. From the Windows Store, you are able to download free and paid-for apps such as games and books. If your Windows To Go workspace is running Windows 8 Enterprise, access to the Windows Store is disabled by default. This is because in Windows 8, the apps you download are licensed to the computer hardware. In other words, the apps themselves are bound to the computer itself. Since a Windows To Go workspace is designed to be used on different computers, use of the Windows Store was disabled. However, you can enable the Windows Store on a Windows To Go workspace running Windows 8 Enterprise by enabling the following group policy: Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Store, Allow Store to install apps on Windows To Go workspaces. On the other hand, if your Windows To Go workspace is running Windows 8.1 Enterprise, access to the Windows Store is enabled by default. With Windows 8.1, the licensing of the Windows Store was updated to make it compatible with Windows To Go. If your Windows To Go workspace is running Windows 8.1 Enterprise, you will notice no difference in the behaviour of the Windows Store. And finally, we have the BITLOCKER feature. BITLOCKER was first introduced with Windows Vista. With BITLOCKER, you are able to encrypt entire drives on your computer, including your operating system drive and removable media. Although BITLOCKER is available with Windows To Go, in fact, Microsoft encourages you to use it, it cannot be used with a TPM. A TPM is a small microchip that is built into the motherboard on most computers and laptops. The purpose of a TPM chip is to store encryption keys. Since a TPM uses its own internal firmware to manage these keys, a hacker cannot use the Windows operating system to hack the TPM and steal the keys, making a TPM a very secure platform for storing this information. Of course, since the USB flash drive you are using for your workspace does not come with its own TPM chip, and since the flash drive is likely to be used on different computers, storing encryption keys in a TPM chip makes no sense at all. For that reason, when BitLocker is used with Windows to Go, it will simply ask you to enter a password before booting the workspace. Only when this password is entered will the workspace decrypt and boot up. Now that we know what Windows to Go is, what exactly are the requirements for the feature? First of all, the computer you use to create the Windows to Go workspace must be running the correct version of Windows. The Windows to Go feature is only available on computers running Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise. No other version of Windows can create a Windows to Go workspace. Secondly, the USB flash drive you use must be a USB 3 device, must have at least 32 GB of disk space, and must be certified by Microsoft. Microsoft keeps a list of recommended USB devices on their website that have been certified to work with Windows to Go. These certified USB devices were actually built with Windows to Go in mind. As such, they have been extensively tested by Microsoft to ensure they are capable of booting and running Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. Furthermore, these certified devices have proven that they are able to handle the high read and write requests that are required by an operating system. In the description of this video, I will provide a link to this page. Microsoft strongly recommends that you use a certified USB device. In fact, using a non-certified USB device is not supported by Microsoft. Next, the host computer you use to boot your Windows to Go workspace must meet the Windows 7 certification requirements. That is, the host computer must have a 1 GHz CPU or faster, must have at least 2 GB of RAM memory installed, the graphics card for the computer must be DirectX 9 compatible and must have a WDDM 1.2 or better driver installed. DirectX 9 was first released back in 2002. Since then, newer versions of DirectX, such as DirectX 10 and DirectX 11, have also been released. As such, it is highly likely that most computers today will support this. Furthermore, the host computer must support USB booting. If the host computer is not capable of booting from a USB device, Windows to Go will not work. On host computers that are capable of booting from USB, the USB port you use to connect the Windows to Go workspace must be either a USB 3 or a USB 2 port. Of course, Microsoft recommends that you use USB 3 where possible for best performance. However, although slower, a USB 2 port will still work. It is worth noting at this point that Microsoft recommends that you connect the Windows to Go flash drive directly to the host computer and not to a USB hub. In fact, a Windows to Go flash drive connected to a USB hub is not supported by Microsoft. This covers the requirements for Windows to Go, which brings us to our next topic of how to create the workspace. To create a Windows to Go workspace, you will have to install an image of either Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise onto the USB flash drive. The image you install onto the flash drive is contained in a special type of file called a .wim file. There are two ways to obtain a .wim file. The first method is to use the install.wim file from the Windows installation DVD. If you have a Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise DVD, this is located in the Sources folder on the DVD. If you specify this install.wim file, you will essentially get a clean installation of Windows on your workspace. Of course, the problem with this approach is that you will then have to manually install any applications you require, such as Microsoft Office, PDF readers, etc. Whilst this is not a problem if you are creating just one workspace, if you work in a large environment and have to create, say, 1,000 workspaces, this approach is simply not practical. To get around this problem, you can build your own customized image of Windows, configured exactly the way you like, and then deploy this image to the USB drive. To create a customized image, you will need a computer running your preferred version of Windows, either Windows 8 Enterprise or Windows 8.1 Enterprise. This computer is known as the reference computer. After installing Windows, you should then configure it the way you like and create the perfect image of Windows. For instance, you may want to install all of the latest Windows updates. You could also install any programs you require, such as Microsoft Office or maybe some sort of third-party application. Once your image is configured exactly the way you want it, you next have to generalize the image. When an image is generalized, it can be installed onto any hardware. This is achieved by removing all of the unique settings from the image that came from the reference computer, such as device hardware IDs, user account SIDs, and the computer hostname and domain membership. Simply put, once the computer is generalized, you can install the image onto hardware that is completely different from that of the reference computer. Fortunately, Windows comes with its own built-in tool for generalizing images, called the System Preparation Tool, or SysPrep for short. After the reference computer is generalized, the reference computer is shut down and is then booted with a special boot image called a Windows pre-installation environment. The image is then turned into a .wim file and is uploaded to a central server, usually a Windows Deployment Services server. When the upload is complete, you can then use the .wim file on the Windows Deployment Services server to create your workspace. Simply put, it does not matter where the .wim file comes from. The process of creating the workspace from the .wim file is exactly the same. Now that we know what Windows To Go is, what the requirements are, and how to create the image, I will now demonstrate how to create a Windows To Go workspace. To do this, I will, in my lab environment, deploy one computer running Windows 8.1 Enterprise. This will be the computer that I will use to create my Windows To Go workspace. Just to confirm, I have already checked that this computer meets the Windows 7 certification requirements and supports USB booting. I will also use my Windows 8.1 Enterprise installation DVD since this contains the install.wim file required to create the workspace. Lastly, I will use an external USB drive that has been certified by Microsoft to host the workspace. After creating the workspace, I will shut the computer down and will use it as a host computer to boot the Windows To Go workspace. So I will now change over to my Windows 8.1 Enterprise computer. First, I will open File Explorer. As you can see, I have 3 drives in this computer. The C drive is the drive containing the Windows 8.1 Enterprise operating system for this computer. The D drive is an optical drive, which, at present, contains my Windows 8.1 Enterprise installation DVD. And, finally, we have an E drive. This is my certified USB hard disk and will become my Windows To Go workspace. If I right-click on my D drive and select Open in New Window, you can see all of the Windows 8.1 installation files on the DVD. Notice that we have a folder named Sources. If I open the Sources folder and scroll down through the list of files, you will see a file named install.wim. Install.wim is the file that essentially contains the Windows 8.1 Enterprise operating system. When I create my workspace, this is the file I will specify that contains my image. Remember, since I am using the install.wim file from the Windows DVD, this will essentially give me a clean installation of Windows 8.1 on my workspace. I will now close File Explorer and will return to my desktop. From here, I will open Charms and will search for Windows To Go. From the list of results, select Windows To Go. This will open the Create a Windows To Go workspace wizard. On the first page of the wizard, you are asked to choose the drive you want to use. Windows will automatically detect all of the USB hard disks and flash drives that are connected to the computer. As you can see, my certified USB drive has appeared listed. So I will select this device and will click the Next button. On the next page, you are asked to choose a Windows 8.1 image. Windows will attempt to locate any .wim files that contain a Windows image. In my case, you can see that Windows has managed to detect the Windows 8.1 Enterprise image on my DVD, which is in the d:/sources directory. Of course, if Windows failed to find your .wim file, you can browse for it manually using the Add Search Location button. When you have selected your image, click Next. The next page gives you the option to encrypt your Windows To Go workspace by setting a BITLOCKER password. This is optional, and whether or not you do this is up to you. Since it is so easy to misplace USB flash drives, personally, I would always recommend that you encrypt your workspace. To do this, tick the Use BitLocker with my Windows To Go workspace checkbox, and then enter and confirm a password. When you are ready to continue, click the Next button. You are now ready to create your Windows To Go workspace. Before you do, you will be notified that the USB drive will be reformatted, so make sure you have removed any important data that may be on the drive first. To create the workspace, click the Create button. Windows will immediately start to create the Windows To Go workspace. It is not uncommon for this to take around 1 to 2 hours to complete, so I will fast forward to the end. The Windows To Go workspace has now been created. At this point, you will be prompted to choose a boot option. The choice you make here essentially decides whether or not you want to set this computer to boot up the Windows To Go workspace rather than its own locally installed operating system after the next reboot. If you select Yes, assuming you have the workspace plugged in, this computer will boot from the Windows To Go workspace when it is next restarted. If you select No, this computer will continue to boot its own operating system following a restart. Of course, you can change this by editing the boot order in the BIOS to boot from USB first. Since I want this computer to be my host computer, I will select Yes and will then click the Save and Close button. Now that the workspace is created, if I reopen File Explorer, you will notice that my E drive is no longer listed. To understand why this is, I will close File Explorer and will open Disk Management from the Start button. As you can see, Disk Management is reporting that I have 2 disks connected to this computer, Disk 0 and Disk 1. Disk 0 is my internal hard disk and contains my C drive. Disk 1 is my external USB drive, which is now my Windows To Go workspace. As you can see, neither of the partitions on my USB drive have drive letters. This explains why they are not appearing in File Explorer. This is by design and is intended to keep the disks in the host computer separate to the Windows To Go workspace. To confirm the workspace works, I will now restart my host computer so that I can boot into the workspace. Since I chose to encrypt my workspace with BitLocker, the first screen I will see when booting to the USB drive is the BitLocker screen. Here, I am required to enter the password I chose earlier. After entering the password, I will press Enter. Windows 8.1 Enterprise will start to boot up. Just like with a brand new computer, the first time you boot up Windows To Go, you are required to configure the initial Windows welcome settings. This includes setting the appropriate region and language options, agreeing to the license terms, personalizing Windows 8 with a color scheme and choosing a computer name, and creating a Windows user account and password on the workspace. After completing Windows Welcome, you will boot into the operating system. As you can see, my Windows To Go workspace looks exactly the same as a typical Windows 8.1 workstation. To prove I am in the workspace, I will open File Explorer. As you can see, there is just one drive, the C drive, which is BitLocker protected. To paint a better picture, I will now close File Explorer and will open Disk Management from the Start button. As you can see, Disk Management is still reporting 2 hard disks, Disk 0 and Disk 1. Disk 0 is the host computer's internal hard disk. Disk 1 is this Windows To Go workspace. As you can see, Disk 0 is currently marked as offline. As such, the disk and its partitions are not accessible. If you recall from earlier, I mentioned that Windows To Go, by design, separates the host computer disks from the Windows To Go workspace. This is done to keep the 2 environments separate. Of course, if you wanted, you are able to bring the host computer's hard disks online and make their drives accessible if you wanted. This is simply a matter of right-clicking the disk and selecting Online. Personally, I am a fan of keeping the workspace completely separate from the host computer, so I will leave this disk offline and will close Disk Management. This concludes this tech tip from Will. I hope you have enjoyed this tech tip and found it useful. If you like our training videos, please show your support by giving us a thumbs up and by subscribing to our channel. Many thanks, and we'll see you on the next tech tip.